On January 22, 2024, 71-year-old Mr. O'Hara welcomed a community nurse to his home in St. Thomas Street, Newcastle. The nurse began by taking his blood pressure and taking blood and urine samples. At this point, Mr. O'Hara's girlfriend, Mrs. Leung, came downstairs and asked if he could have her blood pressure checked as well. After the nurse completed the check, he assured her that everything was fine. The nurse then administered a vaccine to Mr. O'Hara before leaving. As he left, Mrs. Leung remarked that the nurse's height and build were similar to her son's. Soon after, Mr. O'Hara began to experience severe pain. Welcome to Red Eastern True Crime. If you like true crime stories, please subscribe to my channel. Let's dive into this story. Mr. O'Hara quickly contacted his GP and went to the emergency room on his GP's advice. The attending doctor thought it was a simple side effect of the vaccine and that the nurse might have been a bit clumsy. He told Mr. O'Hara not to worry and to rest at home. The next day, however, Mr. O'Hara's condition deteriorated. The arm where he had received the vaccine became massively swollen, and the skin began to rot, turning a disturbing shade of dark purple. His GP was at a loss and advised him to return to the hospital. This time the doctors diagnosed him with necrotizing fasciitis, a rare and life-threatening flesh-eating disease. They warned that the infection could spread uncontrollably if left untreated. Mr. O'Hara underwent several operations to remove the infected tissue from his arm. He spent weeks in intensive care, with doctors describing his survival as a medical miracle. During his treatment, Mr. O'Hara asked both the hospital and his GP if the NHS had sent a nurse to administer the COVID vaccine. He was told that no such nurse had ever been sent. Recalling Mrs. Leung's comment that the nurse looked like her son, Mr. O'Hara began to suspect that someone had deliberately poisoned him. Following the report, the police quickly launched an investigation, which led them to identify Thomas Kwan, Mrs. Leung's son, as the person responsible. Born in Hong Kong in 1971, Thomas Kwan moved to the UK with his family at the age of 13. He went to boarding school and later studied medicine at Newcastle University. Before January 2024, he worked as a GP at the Happy House Surgery in Sunderland and lived in Ingleby Barwick, a southern suburb of Sunderland. He had a respected job and seemed to have a happy family life. His mother, Jenny Leung, has 2 sons and divorced her husband 27 years ago. Before the incident, Mrs. Leung and 71-year-old Mr. O'Hara had been together for more than 20 years and lived at Mrs. Leung's home in St. Thomas Street, Newcastle. Although they were not legally married, Mrs. Leung amended her will to ensure that if she died before Mr. O'Hara, her property in Newcastle would remain with him until his death. Only after his death would her children have the right to inherit. This meant that her sons could not evict Mr. O'Hara, nor could they sell or rent the property while he was alive. Thomas was furious about his mother's decision. He had fought with her on several occasions, accusing her of withdrawing £1 million from a joint account with his father and forcing his father to divorce her. Thomas, who believed that in Chinese culture, the eldest child should inherit the most, felt insulted when his younger brother received a larger share of the inheritance after their father's death. In January 2022, Thomas wrote another letter to his mother, accusing her of stealing money from his father and the family. He said he had never given up his inheritance rights and asked to be made sole executor of her will. "You say I'm selfish or greedy, but I would like you to make me the sole executor of your will and give me the largest share of your properties and inheritance," he wrote. "You've told me many times that I'm the one you love the most of all your children." In December 2020, Thomas gave his mother a laptop, which she gratefully accepted as a generous gift. Unbeknownst to her, Thomas had pre-installed spyware on the laptop that allowed him to monitor her financial activities and watch the house in real time via the webcam. In November 2022, Thomas arrived unannounced at his mother's house in St. Thomas Street. He forced his way in and pushed past Mr. O'Hara to get to his mother. He began to harass her again about her financial affairs, and the police were called. When questioned, Mrs. Leung explained that there had been ongoing family problems, particularly over money. She didn't want to press charges against Thomas because she didn't want it to affect his career as a general practitioner. The police respected her wishes and gave Thomas only a verbal warning. After the incident, Thomas's contact with his mother became limited and mostly indirect. But instead of realizing the damage his obsession and behavior had caused, Thomas decided to take matters into his own hands and plan a perfect murder. Thomas's fascination with toxins and chemicals grew over time. In early 2023, he set up a shell company, claiming to be a researcher in the company's research department. He registered the company with Happy House Surgery, telling the practice manager that it was a property holding company. He also bought several books on poisons and chemicals and conducted experiments himself. Thomas created a new identity as an NHS community nurse and forged documents using the name Raj Patel, a common Indian name. Photographs on his fake ID showed that Thomas had darkened his skin, added fake facial hair, and worn a black wig and brown-tinted glasses. In early November 2023, Thomas sent the first of 2 fake letters to Mr. O'Hara, posing as Raj Patel from the community care team. Neither Raj Patel nor the community team existed. The letter contained NHS logos, hyperlinks, medical jargon, and typical data protection notices. Thomas had been meticulous about every detail, and Mr. O'Hara, who had just received a COVID-19 vaccine months earlier, had no reason to doubt its authenticity. The letter informed him that he would be receiving a home visit for health monitoring and seasonal vaccinations, including a COVID booster. Mr. O'Hara agreed to the appointment. On 3 January 2024, Thomas sent the second fake letter with the date and time of the appointment, January 22, 2024, from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. The letter also included the NHS logo, relevant hyperlinks, and a QR code, linking to a short health questionnaire for Mr. O'Hara to complete before the appointment. As the plan neared execution, Thomas made the final preparations. He bought a prepaid SIM card and took 4 days off work to carry out the plan. On January 12, 2024, 10 days before the planned visit, Thomas and his wife stayed at a Premier Inn in Newcastle to test whether the hotel would be an ideal base for his operation. 3 days later, Thomas booked another room under a false name and address for January 21st. On Sunday, January 21st, Thomas used his new SIM card to send Mr. O'Hara a reminder text message about the upcoming appointment. The next morning, January 22nd, Thomas drove from Sunderland to Newcastle using fake number plates. Hotel CCTV recorded him checking in at around 2:40 a.m. After breakfast, at 9:25 a.m., he was seen leaving the hotel, fully transformed into Raj Patel, wearing a long coat, hat, blue surgical gloves, and a clinical mask to cover his face. His aim was not only to deceive Mr. O'Hara, but also to avoid being recognized by his own mother. Thomas knocked on the door and introduced himself as community nurse Raj Patel. He imitated an Indian accent and spoke broken English. Mr. O'Hara was not suspicious and did not ask for identification. Thomas then went through a medical questionnaire about Mr. O'Hara's general health and took his blood pressure. At this point, Mrs. Leung came downstairs and asked the nurse to check her blood pressure. Thomas agreed, checked it, and assured her that everything was fine. Mrs. Leung didn't notice anything unusual. Thomas then injected poison into Mr. O'Hara's left arm, telling him it was a COVID booster. Immediately after the injection, Mr. O'Hara felt a sharp pain and screamed. Thomas quickly reassured him that it was probably an allergic reaction and that the pain would soon subside. When the injection was complete, Thomas packed up and hurriedly prepared to leave. Mr. O'Hara, still in pain, sensed that the nurse was in a hurry to leave. As Thomas left, Mrs. Leung came back downstairs and casually muttered that the nurse was the same height and build as her son. It was then that Mr. O'Hara realized something was wrong and rushed out to follow the nurse, but he was already gone. Thomas spent a total of 45 minutes in the house. After completing his task, he drove to a nearby fast food restaurant, bought some food, and left the area. Thinking his plan was foolproof, Thomas never imagined that just 2 weeks later he would be arrested by the police. Mr. O'Hara's hospital confirmed that no NHS organization had sent the letter, and that he had been poisoned by an unknown substance. Police quickly reviewed CCTV footage from St. Thomas Street, identified the fake nurse leaving the area, and traced him back to the Premier Inn Hotel. They then followed him to his home in Ingleby, Barwick, and Thomas was arrested on February 5, 2024. Thomas remained largely silent during the questioning. Police searched his home and computer and found evidence of his obsession with poisons and toxic chemicals. They discovered a book detailing the lethal doses, clinical effects, and time taken for various poisons to take effect. They also found a copy of the National Center for Policing Excellence's 2006 Guidance on Homicide Investigation. Police found liquid mercury, thallium, sulfuric acid, and arsenic in Thomas's house and garage. His garage contained materials for making rye, a highly toxic chemical weapon. Further investigation revealed that Thomas had searched for the word ricin several times between the 6th and 21st of January 2024. They also found 97 searches for iodomethane and a video on how to make it. Police found a glass tube containing the poison and a syringe at his home. Mr. O'Hara's doctors initially struggled to understand the cause of his symptoms, but experts later confirmed that he had been poisoned with iodomethane, a pesticide chemical that causes burns and blisters that match Mr. O'Hara's symptoms. Evidence gathered by the police also revealed that Thomas had a backup plan to kill Mr. O'Hara. He carefully crafted a letter, purporting to be from a charity, stating that Mr. O'Hara would be provided with free drinks and ready meals, as he had been identified as an eligible recipient. This was believed to be his attempt to poison Mr. O'Hara through the food and drink. Although Thomas admitted injecting Mr. O'Hara with a harmful substance, he denied intending to kill or cause serious harm. He claimed his aim was only to cause mild pain and discomfort. While Thomas was in custody awaiting trial, police intercepted his communications with his wife. He told her that he had been too stupid to destroy the evidence before his arrest. He also continued to monitor his mother's financial situation. When he heard that Mr. O'Hara might seek compensation for his injuries, he wrote to his wife, "Mother and this old man win and take all our hard-earned money in our house, and we are left with nothing. How can that be justice?" Under increasing pressure from the prosecution, Thomas pleaded guilty on 7 October 2024, hoping for a swift sentence. On November 6, 2024, several British news outlets reported that Thomas Kwan had been sentenced to 31 years in prison. He will serve 2/3 of his sentence before being eligible for parole, which will be after he reaches the age of 70. The judge also issued a restraining order preventing Thomas from contacting Mr. O'Hara directly or indirectly. Mr. O'Hara, who survived the attack after undergoing several operations and losing part of his arm, was left emotionally and physically scarred. The ordeal eventually led to his separation from Jenny Leung, Thomas Kwan's mother. Thomas Kwan's crime not only caused immense harm to Mr. O'Hara and his mother, but also severely damaged public confidence in the medical profession. Following his arrest, the UK General Medical Council stripped him of his medical license. Happy House Surgery, where he had worked, reviewed all his patient records and claimed to have found no evidence that he had posed a threat to any of his patients during his career. Thomas Kwan's greed for his mother's property and his sense of entitlement led him to believe that he deserved everything. His resentment of his mother and his obsession with money drove him to extreme measures to eliminate Mr. O'Hara. As a doctor, someone sworn to save lives, Thomas betrayed his professional ethics by using his knowledge for criminal purposes. His actions were cold-blooded, carefully planned and calculated. Even after his arrest, he showed no remorse, instead blaming the victim for taking his property, further highlighting his extreme narcissism. The media have not revealed whether his wife was aware of or involved in his criminal plans. What do you think about this case? Please share your thoughts and opinions in the comments section. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed my video, please like and subscribe to my channel.